Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are cracking open a really fascinating look at some, well, foundational questions in psychology.
Yeah, some really core stuff.
We're digging into an article titled Free Will, Determinism, Reductionism, and Holism in Psychology. Big title, big ideas.
Definitely sets the stage.
And our mission for this exploration is really to help you, maybe you're a psychology student, sort of cut through some of the complexity.
Yeah, and grasp these big picture ideas a bit faster.
Think of this as getting the essential nuggets, the
Yeah.
key insights from this source to give you a clear understanding of the different perspectives shaping the field.
Exactly. And these aren't just abstract philosophical points. They really do underpin how psychologists think, how they design studies, build theories.
Then even how they approach helping people, right?
Absolutely. Understanding these debates gives you a crucial framework for, well, pretty much everything else you're learning.
Okay, let's dive into the first major debate the source unpacks. Free will versus determinism.
Ah, yes, the classic tension.
Is our behavior truly a result of our own personal choices, our free will? Or is it fundamentally caused by forces outside our conscious control, determinism?
So on the free will side, the belief is pretty straightforward.
Hmm.
Individuals genuinely have the capacity to make choices.
We're autonomous agents, is how the source puts it.
Exactly. Meaning our behavior isn't just some, predetermined outcome based on our biology or our past experiences or what's happening around us right now.
So, thinking about what the source highlights, free will is that sense of choice, of autonomy. We can choose how to act sort of independently of prior causes.
Right. The idea is that behavior is guided by our conscious thought, our deliberate decisions. Your past doesn't automatically lock in your future actions.
Okay. And the article gives an example.
Yeah, a pretty common scenario. A student choosing to stay home and revise for an exam instead of going out with friends.
Right.
From a strict free will view, that decision is the student's choice, purely theirs, not like compelled by social pressure or biological needs or anything.
But here's where the source throws in a curveball, doesn't it? This idea of subjectivity and the illusion of free will.
Yeah, this is really interesting. We might feel like we're choosing freely,
But are we?
but the source asks, could we actually be influenced by forces we're not even aware of?
Mm-hmm.
And this point is underlined by another example. They use a teenager picking out clothes.
Okay.
They might genuinely feel like this is me, my unique style, expressing themselves freely.
Right.
But the source suggests, well, hang on. How much are those choices actually shaped by peer pressure, by fashion trends, by advertising?
Ah, okay. So it makes you question how much of that felt choice is truly autonomous versus, driven by social influence.
Exactly. It muddies the waters a bit.
And the source also brings up psychological disorders as a significant challenge to the pure concept of free will. That part really get me thinking.
Absolutely. Think about, say, someone with obsessive-compulsive OCD. They feel compelled to perform rituals.
Right. It's not like they wake up and think, I fancy doing some rituals today.
Precisely. The source points out they don't freely choose those behaviors. There's this intense internal drive, this compulsion.
Or someone with schizophrenia.
Yeah, whose actions might be influenced by hallucinations or delusions. Their behavior seems disconnected from, typical conscious control or choice.
So these examples, the source argues, they lean heavily towards a deterministic explanation, don't they?
They do. They suggest the behaviors are driven by underlying factors, biological, neurological, maybe unconscious stuff,
Yeah.
rather than deliberate free choice.
Which brings us neatly to the other side, determinism.
The opposite view, basically. It posits that our behaviors are caused by factors entirely beyond our control, so not freely chosen.
And the core principle the source emphasizes here is cause and effect, right?
Every behavior is the result of some specific identifiable cause, or maybe multiple causes, but causes nonetheless.
So no real autonomy in this view. All actions are determined by prior events or conditions?
That's the idea. And the article helpfully breaks down different kinds of determinism.
Okay, like what?
Well, there's biological determinism. This suggests behavior is primarily shaped by, genetics, brain chemistry, hormones, that kind of thing.
So an example might be linking someone's tendency towards anxiety to their specific genes or maybe neurotransmitter levels.
Exactly. Or aggression linked to hormonal imbalances, that sort of thing.
Got it. What else?
Then there's environmental determinism. This argues behavior is essentially learned through interaction with the environment. Think Skinner conditioning.
Reinforcement, punishment.
Right. So a child who's consistently praised for being polite learns that behavior because of the external reward. The environment determined the behavior.
Okay. And there was a third one.
Psychic determinism. This is more from Freud and the psychodynamic approach.
The unconscious.
Exactly. Unconscious motives, unresolved conflicts, past experiences, especially from childhood. These are seen as the hidden drivers of our current behavior.
And the source example was about forgetting something.
Yeah, like accidentally forgetting an appointment isn't really an accident. It might reflect an unconscious desire to avoid whatever that appointment represents. A hidden cause.
Okay, so we have these different flavors of determinism. What about the arguments for it? Why find it convincing?
Well, the source points to its scientific credibility. Science often relies on predictability,
Right.
cause and effect.
Like in medicine or physics. If X happens, Y follows.
Precisely. And if behavior is determined by causes, it potentially becomes predictable, which aligns well with a scientific worldview.
And there's a practical angle, too.
Yeah, the real-world application.
Huh.
Many psychological treatments, and medical ones too, are based on identifying and addressing underlying causes.
Like finding a genetic cause for a mental illness or identifying environmental triggers.
Exactly. That whole causal approach is fundamentally deterministic in nature. You find the cause, you treat the cause.
Makes sense. But the source doesn't just present the pros, right? There are criticisms.
Oh, definitely. One big one is the issue of unfalsifiability. Well, if you claim that every single behavior has a cause, but sometimes you can't actually find or identify that cause, how can anyone prove you wrong?
Ah, I see. If you can't find the cause, you just say, well, it exists, we just haven't found it yet. It makes the claim hard to test scientifically.
Exactly. It can become a bit circular.
And there's a huge philosophical issue too, isn't there? The accountability problem.
Yes, the source raises this very important point.
Hmm.
If all our behavior is determined by forces beyond our control, are we actually responsible for our actions?
Wow, yeah. That throws a wrench into legal systems, moral judgments, even just how we think about ourselves.
It really does. It's a massive implication.
So for you listening, as you're navigating different areas of psychology, it's really crucial to see how the major approaches kind of line up on this debate. It shapes how they study people.
Absolutely. The source helps clarify this.
Hmm.
Approaches like, say, the psychodynamic, the biological, the behaviorist, they tend to lean mostly deterministic.
Because they're looking for those underlying causes, right? Unconscious drives, genes, brain chemistry, conditioning.
Exactly. They're fundamentally searching for those determining factors.
Whereas humanistic psychology
Stands out as a strong supporter of free will. It really emphasizes personal agency, choice, self-determination, the drive to grow.
Okay. And what about the cognitive approach? Where does it sit?
The source suggests it's a bit more mixed, kind of
Oh,
nuanced.
how so?
Well, it has deterministic elements, especially in how it models information processing. You know, the mind is a computer following certain rules or pathways, input, process, output.
Right, that sounds quite determined.
But it also heavily emphasizes conscious thought, decision-making, problem-solving, planning, things that feel much more aligned with having free will.
So it bridges the gap a bit.
You could say that.
Yeah.
Understanding where each approach generally stands helps you predict the kinds of research questions they'll ask and what kind of evidence they'll find compelling.
That's really helpful framing. Okay, let's shift gears. The source tackles another huge debate. Reductionism versus holism.
Right. So this isn't about what causes behavior, but how we should go about explaining it.
Should we break complex stuff down into the simplest possible parts? That's reductionism.
Or should we look at the whole integrated picture? That's holism.
Let's start with reductionism.
Mhm.
The source defines it as basically simplification.
Yeah, breaking down complex behaviors or psychological phenomena into simpler, more basic, more elemental components.
And the source uses the multi-store model of memory as an example.
It does. Instead of wrestling with memory as one big, messy, complex thing, the model reduces it to 3 distinct parts or stores.
Sensory, short-term, long-term. Much simpler to grasp and test.
Exactly. And the source identifies different levels or types of reductionism.
Okay.
There's biological reductionism, trying to explain behavior purely in terms of genes, neurons, brain structures, chemicals, the lowest physical level.
Then environmental reductionism.
Yeah, that's like the behaviorist approach, explaining everything through simple stimulus-response links. Learning theory.
And one more. Machine reductionism.
Right. This is common in cognitive psychology, using the computer analogy, explaining human thinking as input, processing, output, breaking thought down into computational steps.
So what's the appeal? Why be a reductionist? The source points out an obvious advantage.
It makes things way easier to test scientifically, doesn't it?
Yeah, you can isolate variables, control things in a lab, measure specific components.
It lends itself well to empirical research. Much easier than trying to study everything all at once.
There's a big but, isn't there? The source highlights a major downside.
Oh, definitely. The criticism is that it often drastically oversimplifies truly complex human behaviors and experiences.
You lose the richness,
Right.
the context.
Exactly. By focusing only on the tiny parts, you can completely miss the bigger picture, the individual nuance, the way things interact. You lose sight of the integrated whole person.
Which leads us perfectly into holism.
The counterargument. Holism says, no, you shouldn't break behavior down into components.
You have to look at the whole system.
Yes, behavior must be understood by looking at the whole person interacting within their complex environment. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts, essentially.
And the source's example for holism was depression.
Right. A holistic view wouldn't just focus on, say, serotonin levels, that's biological reductionism.
Or just negative thought patterns, cognitive reductionism.
No, it would consider the interplay of everything. Biology, environment, thoughts, feelings, social factors, personal history, all working together.
That sounds, well, more realistic maybe. More person-centered.
That's the advantage, definitely. It acknowledges the true complexity of human experience. It feels more complete.
But the source notes a major disadvantage too, right? It's tricky for science.
Very tricky. How do you scientifically study everything at once? With so many interacting variables, it becomes incredibly difficult to isolate causes, conduct controlled experiments, establish clear predictive models.
It's much harder to pin down.
Much harder using traditional scientific methods, yeah.
Now, the source mentions Rose's levels of explanation model from 1976, which sounds like a useful way to think about this tension.
It really is. It helps visualize how phenomena can be studied at different levels, from the most reductionist to the most holistic.
Can you walk us through that?
Sure. Think of it like a ladder. At the very bottom, the most reductionist level is molecular thinking in terms of physics, atoms, ions.
Like neuron firing involving sodium ions moving?
Exactly. Then up a step to cellular biochemistry, neurotransmitters, cell structures.
Okay.
Up again to biological organs, systems, like specific brain regions and their functions.
Then we get to the person.
Right. The psychological level focusing on the individual's behavior, their thoughts, their feelings. This is where much of psychology operates.
And the top level, most holistic.
That's the sociological level, looking at group behavior, social dynamics, cultural influences, how people interact in societies.
And the source points out a trade-off across these levels.
Yeah, there's an inherent trade-off. Generally speaking, the higher up that ladder you go, the more holistic you get. The explanation might feel more complete, more ecologically valid.
More like real life.
But it also tends to become less easily testable using strict, controlled scientific methods. It's harder to isolate variables and prove cause and effect definitively at the sociological level compared to, say, the molecular level.
Okay, that makes sense. And just like with free will determinism, understanding where different psychological approaches tend to fall on this spectrum, reductionism, holism, is really key for you as a student.
Absolutely. It tells you a lot about their methods and priorities. The source makes this pretty clear. Biological, cognitive, and behaviorist approaches, they tend to be more reductionist.
The biological focuses on the smallest physical bits, genes, brain cells. Behaviorist on simple stimulus response units. Cognitive often treats the mind like a machine with distinct processing parts.
Right. They're breaking things down.
Conversely,
Yeah.
psychodynamic and humanistic approaches.
Generally more holistic. Psychodynamic looks at the complex interplay of many internal forces and past experiences shaping the whole personality.
And humanistic.
Focuses squarely on the entire individual's subjective experience, their potential, their self-awareness, all within their unique context. Very holistic.
Okay, so wrapping up. We've used this source to really take a deep dive into two absolutely fundamental debates in psychology.
Yeah, free will versus determinism.
Exploring whether behavior is driven by personal choice or those determining forces.
And reductionism versus holism.
Questioning whether we should explain behavior by breaking it down into simple parts or by looking at the whole complex picture.
And the source makes a really crucial point here, especially for you listening. Grappling with these frameworks isn't just academic exercise.
It's not just for exams.
No. It's vital for developing a more nuanced understanding of yourself, of other people, of society. These debates provide different lenses, different ways to view every single behavior you encounter.
It absolutely reframes things, doesn't it? Which leads to a final thought, perhaps. given this constant tension the source highlights between explaining behavior through determining factors versus acknowledging personal choice.
Or between breaking complex actions down into simple parts versus trying to see the integrated whole.
How do you see these debates playing out? In the real world, behaviors you observe, maybe in the news, or even just experience in your own life, day to day.
Yeah. Where do you see reductionism at work? Where do you see holism? When does behavior feel determined, and when does it feel truly chosen?
Something to keep mulling over long after this deep dive ends.